and it was impossible to remember. And one of the ways of remember that the Gemara says is like we do it as kids. We teach our children sometimes, especially in the Chassidish schools, everything comes with a song. Parshas Hazinu. Every father who has a daughter, the daughter came home singing Parshas Hazinu. We all understood. And I know Parshas Hazinu very well because of my daughter, by heart, because everybody used to come home and sing. She was there's many different shivas that you used to learn in school. You remember them better because it was taught in a way of a song. So if you hear, sometimes you go to a beis medrash, sometimes you see it online, you hear there's a lot of singing going on, because it was one of the ways to get you motivated, also a way to remember certain things. And that's why the Gemara, when it's printed, the Gemara is printed, there is always going to be a certain, on every single Gemara, there's Rashi and Tosfos on both sides, on just about every single block of the Gemara. There's Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi is on the right side, and Tosfos is on the left side. When you're looking at the front page of the things, when you flip over the page, and on the base, it's reversed. The top four lines, a top line of the Gemara page is 4 lines on one side and 4 lines on the other. Every single Gemara that you ever look at it, you will see has 4 lines on top. One side Rashi and one side Tosfos, and everything has a story. There's a reason for that. So people should remember positioning. The Gedolim, if you would ask them a Gemara from any Gemara, they would be able to pinpoint where it was, because what they call that first hadaf. The daf never changes. The way the daf was printed today, it was also printed 300 years ago. And those Gedolim remember the daf as it's written, and you sometimes, when you think back of the Gemara, you say, sure, it's on the bottom of a certain element. And you start looking at the bottom, how to find that flat, because certainly at that I don't remember it as well as some other people. So everything is Messiah, it's handed down, and everything is repetition in a way, and that's how we remember it. The Yeshua gave the Torah to the Zakanim, and these Zakanim was Zeshakana Chacham. These were the Gedolim of Torah at that time. Now also the Zakanim it developed into the name, what we hear the name of Shoftim, the Shoftim. The Zakanim were really the Shoftim of Klal Yisrael. They were the leaders, they were the judges, they were the people who, if you had any situation or had a question, these were the Zakanim. And the Zakanim and Shoftim, when they're interchangeable, those names. The Zakanim, they passed it along to the Nevi'im. The Nevi'im were, we all know, the Navi, as well that we learned in Navi. Now, Nevi'im started, there were 15 generations of Zakanim, and Nevi'im started with Shmuel, Eli Kohen Gadol. Eli Kohen, you know the story with Shmuel, with Hannah. He was crying, and he had a baby called Shmuel. Shmuel was considered the first Navi of Klal Yisrael. Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron, all the people, in fact, even everybody who was at the splitting of the Yam were considered Nevi'im. They were able to see things. The Gemara says that a shivcha shabiyam, a slave woman who was at the splitting of the sea, saw more Nevi'ah than even Cheskel ben Nevi'ah, even a Navi, one of the Nevi'im that was later on. He didn't see anything near all these special visions, beneficial visions, and how an Navi sees the vision is interesting. Many different things about that, but basically most of them saw them in dreams. And a Navi was also, in order to become a Navi, you obviously had to have a complete kedusha about yourself, because you were elevated to a certain extent that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave you a vision of what he wanted. And there were 18 Nevi'im. There's a little bit of a chalikas if there's another 3, but basically there were 18 Nevi'im that we consider generations of different Nevi'im. And so there were 15 Zakanim and 18 Nevi'im. A Navi, of course, as we know, is somebody who has a vision. And these visions have to be coming from the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Torah says many different things about people who would have a Nevi and they believe it came from the Rebbeinu Shalom. If not, they get their serious punishments for that. So they have to be in a certain level of kedusha to be able to receive Nevi'ah. So the Nevi'im gave it on to the Masruha al-Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. Now here, they gave it, the Nevi'im gave it to the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, which was at the time of Ezra, which is The first Beis Hamikdash was Chor, and then we had 70 years that between the first building of the base, between the first Beis Hamikdash and the building of the second Beis Hamikdash. With Klal Yisrael, basically, they took them out of the Bnei Yisrael were had to leave Eretz Yisrael, and most of them went to Babel, went to Iraq. And so 70 years they lived in Babel, they established themselves. Jews, when they go to different countries, it doesn't take that long for them to establish themselves and become actually part of the country and very wealthy in many different instances. So they were very comfortable in Babel. And Ezra, who was a Navi, and was one from the last Nevi'im, the question is if it's Haggai, Mordechai, and Daniel, but Ezra brought Klal Yisrael back to Eretz Yisrael when they started to build the second Beis Hamikdash. Now, not everybody wanted to come back to Eretz Yisrael. In fact, Ezra, the Levium, there's Kehanim, Levium, Israel, we all know that. The Levium, most of the Levium did not want to come back to Eretz Yisrael. They were very, whatever the reason was, they were very comfortable about it. So now we know that the Kohen gets the Truma, and the Levi gets the Maisa. So Truma is actually technically much less than Maisa. Truma is 1 out of 50, Maisa is 1 out of 10, 10%. So the Ezra was Masakin that if they don't come back to Eretz Yisrael, he punished the Levium, and he said that they will not get Maisa in Eretz Yisrael. The Maisa is only can only be in Eretz Yisrael. And he gave them to the Kohen, because the Kohanim technically are children of Bnei Levi as well, they're cousins. So the Moshe and Aharon, so Moshe, they were brothers originally. So the punishment that Ezra gave was that they should not get any. So that's the history as far as the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. Ezra established a Knesset Hagdolah. There's like an assembly, a great assembly, they call it. And this was 120 people, like a Sanhedrin. Now, why were they called Anshe Knesset Hagdolah? Why were they any greater than anybody else? Because when the Churban happened, there was a big discussion, because we daven in the morning, we say, okay, Hagiboy, Agodoy, Hagiboy, Vahanoy. And some of the Nevi'im, it was trying to remember what, Yirmi and Daniel, they said, how could we say, what are we saying, okay, Hagodol, the great, the big one, the great, Hagiboy Vahanoira, the most powerful. What do you mean he's the most powerful? People are going to start laughing if we're going to say that in our tefillah, because how powerful could he be that he allowed his children to be that Beis Hamikdash should be destroyed and the children should go into Golan. So they took those two words out. They took out the words okay, Hagodol and Hagiboy. Ezra, on the other hand, decided to put it back. And his logic was like this, and I'll illustrate this again with a little story that happened in Bergen-Belsen, in one of the main concentration camps. There was one of the famous Rabbanim was the Muzha Rav. He was a Rav already in Europe already. And then he came, he successfully, Baruch Hashem, made it through the war, and he established a shul on 58th Street in Borough Park. He was there for about 35 years. After that, he passed away exactly 100. He was a shul. He was very, very accepted in Bergen-Belsen. I'm sorry, in terms of everybody. Even there was a famous German general story with him. Don't want to get into that. That was unbelievable with him. But he was everybody. He had a very special nature, and people. He was obvious. You could tell that he was aristocratic. And when it was Hanukkah in Bergen-Belsen, you have to realize what it looked like there. People were starving. They literally can barely get up in the morning. They were freezing. It was the middle of the winter. It's Hanukkah, and it was as difficult as you can. We can't imagine the difficulty of what people went through. So this is what we have now. When they spoke to somebody, went to a concentration camp, and he said, "So let me think this through." He says, "You're home." He says, "You have all the food you need. You have air conditioning if it's cold, if it's warm, and you have the heat if it's cold. You have your family around you," he says, "and you're instructed to stay in your house." He says, "Just do it." He says, "Just do it." This is nothing compared to what Yidden went through just 75 years ago. So he says, like, so what happened was he was lighting they found the oil. They somehow the whole group in the bunk found some oil and wicks. They took the wicks from the clothing. They ripped out some little things, and he starts to light them. And it was the first night of Hanukkah. He makes the bracha, and then he hesitates, and then he makes the third bracha of Shechiyanu, and then he finishes it, and the whole place over there starts to symbolize to it. After everything happened, one of there were a lot of people there that were not firm. There were, in fact, a lot of them were atheists, and some of them were like the writers. It's not in what they had that lives before that were totally alienated from Yiddishkeit. And one of them goes over to him, and he was an educated fellow, and he says, he says, let me ask you a question. I understand that it's a mitzvah to light the Chanukah, you make two brachas. He says, how could you say, Shechiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu l'zman hazeh? How's it possible? How's it possible? You're happy that you're in the right now over here where you are right now. How could you even think that for a second? That it would be thanked to a bunch that he lets us live when many of them really actually were hoping they didn't want to have the courage, or they knew the halacha, they wouldn't want to kill themselves. But if they did wake up in the morning, it would have been no problem for many of them. And Shechiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu l'zman hazeh, for this time right now, says, how could you even think of making such a bracha? So he looks at him and he starts to cry and he says, let me tell you, I'm tired of you, he says. It's true. And then if you notice, I hesitated before I made the bracha. And then I looked around. And I said, could you imagine in a place like with being treated like the dregs of society? We're in a place where no human being should ever be, even an animal should never be here. He said, and then I saw all the hungry faces that all they were looking for was to light this menorah, that we all came together for the mitzvah of Hanukkah. He says, that moment, he says, that I was able to see something like that Jews are hungry for a mitzvah, but they're dying, people are getting killed because they're Jews, and yet they say, for now, that deserves a bracha in itself. And this is exactly what Ezra said. Ezra said, it's a nest. People, the Mark Twain said 150, 200 years ago almost, it's amazing that the Jewish people still exist. He says, after what they've gone through. He says, it's amazing. He went to Israel, actually, goes through this whole thing about how Israel looked at the time. It was desolate. There was nobody there. He traveled from Jaffa to Yerushalayim on a donkey. And he said, I didn't see people for miles. He says, there was nobody there. He said, this is the place that people have been praying for. He said, until I came to Jerusalem and I saw the majesty of the city, of the walls of Jerusalem. He says, at the end of the day, he says, Ezra said, this is the fact that we exist in such a churb, and we want, and of course, 90% want to come back to an Eretz Yisrael and they want to be Jews. He says, alone deserves to buy. You should put back. That shows the greatness of the Rebbe. Okay. And they put it back into the Shemona Esrei. And that is why the Shemona Esrei has Gadol Gibor Amor, and that's they're called Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. Okay, so I'll just finish the Mishneh. I have to say, I don't know what time is. They're all going to have to tell me when I'm getting over time. Okay. This was the Masira. This is the last of the Masiras officially on the first Mishnah, because it goes on. Everyone has different Masira as well. And Heim Amru Shloisha Devarim. The people of the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah said the Heim Amru means, when it says Heim Amru, it says Hu HaYom. It's going to see it throughout this Masechta. This is what they always used to, whenever they used to meet somebody or speak or something, this was always on their lips. It was always in their mind. These are the three things that are very, very important. Three things. Have a Masina Badin, it's very interesting. And I'll explain to you in a second that would be regular pshat and then what could be said. Have a Masina Badin. First of all, when a rabbi or rav or something is a place, somebody comes in there, two people that have a shaila, he says you have to make sure that the two people are treated equally, and you should be very careful with the din. Don't rush your judgment. Just make sure that your judgment is correct. So therefore, be careful before you make a psak. That's the first thing they said. Second thing they said is v'hamidu talmidim harve. Make sure you have many, many, many students. You should open big yeshivas. You should have many yeshivas with many, many students. And this is a little bit against one of the gedolim of that time when we had this in the Haggadah. It said that there was a base med. I'm trying to remember the wording exactly. That okay, I'll come back to it in a second when it comes to me. But regardless, there was a time that the Chachamim used to test you before. Even today, they test you in the big schools. But they know that there's another school you can go to. But in those days, there was one or two main yeshivas, and if you didn't make it, they didn't send you to yeshiva. They told you to go to work. So and they didn't. So they said, said, no, you should accept everybody in your yeshivas. It's very important to be mom. A lot of talmidim. And the third thing they said is, the Chachamim, they're talking. This is talking about the Chachamim. They should, and yourself actually. You should always put some sort of a gate. This is as far as I can go, because if I continue any more than this, then I will do something wrong. And we see this many times in many halachas where the Chachamim said different things that really it doesn't say in the Torah, but they realize that if they allow this to happen, then you will do things that are not proper. So basically, putting some sort of a stopgap so that you shouldn't be oiven avera. So I was having this question that it's talking over here to Heimam Rishloish Devarim. They're talking to Klal Yisrael. So this seems to be talking to only a very select people over here, the people who are maybe the leaders of Klal Yisrael. So I had a little bit of an insight into this. Have a masulim badin. This is what this is Avos is about. Avos is, as I was saying, is a Musa sefer. You want to judge somebody else. You see somebody doing something. You see somebody coming late to shul, and you have a tough judgment against him. You better be careful what you say. You go over to the guy, you see a guy is talking in shul, and you say, "Stop talking," and 15 minutes later you're talking. That don't be so quick to judge somebody. Or if you see somebody doing something, you think he's doing something wrong. Don't be so quick to judgment. Because first of all, you don't know the circumstances. And second of all, he could be doing something totally innocent. Be very, very careful before you judge somebody. The Chafetz Chaim used to say, when you judge somebody, let's say for speaking in shul, and you do it yourself, you are judged much more harshly in Shemayim than had you not judged him. Because Hashem judges you the way you judge other people. So you have to be very, very careful the way you say when you say something about somebody else or when you judge somebody, because you're going to be judged on that same level of strictness. So if you're strict with somebody else, you better make sure that you're very strict with yourself. Don't, like they say, people in glass houses should not throw stones, because you never know when it will come to you. That's the first things I tried to learn this pshat. V'hamidu talmidim harvei. Now, how could you tell Klal Yisrael? How could you tell anybody he should have a lot of talmidim? He's a guy goes to work every day. What do you mean have a talmidim? He has no chance to make talmidim. Otherwise, can everybody be a Rosh Hashiva? It's not really possible. So there was this at the time of Batsheva Kanievsky. There were two soldiers, women, who one of them was firm, one was not firm. And one of them was not feeling well. And she felt that she had something very serious. And she didn't know what to do. And they were in their barracks. And she was telling her friends. And every night she would tell her, I don't know, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. So she said, you know what? It could be physical, could be psychological. You went to the doctor and don't find anything. She says, why don't we go speak to Rebbetzin Kanievsky? So she says, who's that? So she explains to her, so she says, listen, I'm I'm a Chiloni. That's embarrassment for me to go to her, first of all. And second of all, I don't really believe so much in these things. She says, what do you got to lose? There's nothing to lose. Why don't you just come along? And she talked her into it. So, of course, we know that they live in Bnei Brak. They got on a bus and they get the bus, they make a couple of changes and they get to Bnei Brak. And of course, they don't know where she lives. So they were on the bus, and there was a couple of Chassidish people over there. So one of them walks over to one of the Chassidim. He says, "Can you do me a favor and tell me where Chaim Kanievsky lives?" So he says, "I'll tell you what stop it is." And they go a few stops. He says, "You have to get off at this stop." And they go off. And it's a pretty hot day. And as they get off the bus, they go over to somebody on the street and say, "Could you show me which house the Chaim Kanievsky lives in?" And the guy says, "What do you mean? He doesn't live here." He says, "What are you talking about? He lives here. He lives like there's a whole a mile and a half down." So they didn't know what to think. So he says, "But there were soldiers," and they said, but tell me where he lives, and we'll go there. We'll walk there." So they went and they walked there. Finally they get there. And they sit down in the room, and somebody says, somebody comes down and says, "Yeah, I'd like to speak to Rebbetzin Kanievsky." They get into the room, El Rebbetzin Kanievsky, and they have a whole conversation, and that's that. As they're coming out, there's a fella. All of a sudden, a man runs into this room where they were sitting and waiting, and he's looking around, and he spots these two soldiers, and he runs over to them and says, "Here's 5 shkolim." He says, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Here's 5 shkolim." He says, "I was nuts. What are you giving me 5 shkolim?" He says, "You don't understand. I'm the guy on the bus that told you where to get off, and then I realized after I told you where to get off, I made a mistake. So you probably took another bus. You got to pay another 5 shkolim between the two of you. So here is the 5 shkolim." And they said, no, it's fine. You told they walked and everything like that. P.S. Fast forward 15 years. Both of these women are from, they're living in Bnei Barak. The kids go to yeshiva. The husbands are sitting and learning. And unbelievable. So somebody goes over to her and tells her, "I want to know what Rebbetzin Kanievsky tells her." Oh, the friend who later, they didn't live together, had split up somehow, and says, I was always curious, what did Rebbetzin Kanievsky tell you that made you make such a drastic change in your life? So she says it had nothing to do with Rebbetzin Kanievsky. I could never believe that somebody could come chase us down. Remember that we were going to Kanievsky and want to give back 5 shkolim because he made a mistake. He says, "This would never happen in my society." He said, "People like that, I want to join." And that's the impetus. That's what happened to this girl, and that's how she became from. And that is what the Mishneh is saying. Hamidu talmidim harbe. Every time we do an action, people are watching us. And when we do something that is a kiddush Hashem, people want to be part of our group, so to speak, our club. We're in an exclusive club. And we are making talmidim every time we stay outside. The difference is we could make good talmidim and bad talmidim. So we have to be very, very careful how we behave and make a kiddush Hashem every single time we possibly can. And I'll just finish. I'm gonna finish up with one more little thing over here. There's last week Friday was the yard site of a Yavitz, Now the Gemara says that on Yom Tov, every Monday and Thursday, three different people get Aliyah. Shabbos, 7 people are called up to the Torah. Yom Tov, only 5 people are called up to the Torah. So the Gemara asks, why only 5? So the Gemara says, because they're busy with the Suda of Shabbos, so they come late to Shul. Or they go home earlier, either way. So the Avos asks, what do you mean? We're talking about the men in Shul over here. What does that got to do with the Suda in the house when they come home from Shul? Says the Avos, something maybe everybody here could appreciate. Said the Avos, it's incumbent upon the husband to watch the children while the wives are making lunch. He said the Chachamim made a siyag. They realized, how can you expect a wife to make a good meal when she has 11 children running around under her feet? So he says the Chachamim allowed the less Torah should be read on Yom Tov, so that the husband should go and help their wives with the children so that they can make a meal for Shabbos. So with that, I'll stop, and Yetz Hashem will see each other tomorrow, hopefully. Yeah, and again, we'd like the learning of Perek to help any Yeshua's reports in every aspect of party. So thank you very much.
Amazing.
Thank you so much.
Yes, that was really nice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.